Good afternoon. Welcome to another session of EEA Ask an Expert. My name is Gülçin Karadeniz and I'll be moderating this discussion. I am from the European Environment Agency's communications team, and I'm joined by two colleagues, extended colleagues. One is Samy Djavidnia from European Maritime Safety Agency. Hi, Samy. And our second guest today is a colleague from the European Environment Agency, Stéphane Isoard. Hi, Stéphane.
Hi,
so welcome. Today we are going to talk about environmental impacts of the maritime transport sector and how the sector can actually achieve sustainability, the steps that could be taken, that are being taken, based on a joint report that we launched together, EEA and EMSA, in September this year. And Stéphane and Samy have been very much involved in this report and preparing this assessment. So maybe we start with you, Samy. Can you just briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, so good afternoon to all, and thanks very much, Gülçin, for inviting me to this live event. My name is Samy Djavidnia. I work for EMSA, which is the European Maritime Safety Agency. And EMSA is the agency of the EU that supports the Commission and member states in the quest for a safe, secure, green, and also competitive maritime sector. We are based in, we're so lucky, in the wonderful city of Lisbon as of 2006. And I joined EMSA now almost 15 years ago. That is when I had long blonde hair and blue eyes. My responsibility at the agency are within the sustainability unit, where I lead the work on EMTER, which we will talk about today, underwater noise, as well as other environmental monitoring programs.
What about you, Stéphane? Can you just briefly describe what you do at the EEA?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you indeed, Gülçin, for putting this together and organizing this session. I'm Stéphane Isoard. Indeed, I work at the European Environment Agency. I'm leading the work on freshwater and marine environment. It means that in the group I'm leading, we handle and we analyze data on water quality in Europe, water quantity, and also the pollution of the marine environment, including the different maritime sectors, and that includes also the maritime transport that we are going to discuss today.
Exactly. There's a lot of stuff that is happening that we need to discuss in the maritime transport sector. So I just mentioned that we have recently published this report on the environmental impacts. Abbreviation is EMTER. So if our viewers actually do hear us using this abbreviation, we do refer to that report. Maybe we start with you, Samy. What makes this report unique? Why did we join forces?
Yeah,
two agencies?
That's a very good question. And I guess the report is unique because of a number of reasons. So we started the project at the beginning of 2020, and the objective was to present really a factual analysis of the relationship between the maritime transport sector and the environment in the EU. And we discussed it several times with Stéphane and the rest of the team. This is the first of its kind done both at EU and, as a matter of fact, also elsewhere at international level. It is really the first, let me put it like this, the first compendium covering the environmental aspects of the maritime transport sector in the EU. And although the focus of the report is on the quantitative aspects, we really felt the need to contextualize the sector in terms of also its economics and social importance, the international legislative framework, the sustainable solutions that are being developed, the monitoring system, and the future trends that are there as well. And for what concerns the joining of the forces, well, I think I can say it was a rather natural coming together, as the report covers the raison d'etre of both agencies, of both EMSA and the EEA, so the maritime part and the environmental sector. I guess it would have been really small-minded to expect to do this work on our own. And I mean, we further to the initiative and intuition of a number of colleagues, spearheaded by one of Stéphane's, in fact, colleagues, Irene Del Barrio, we soon figured out how important, and I can also add how enjoyable it was to work together on this project.
Yeah, it's true. Stéphane, what was the added value to you and to your team working with colleagues from EMSA?
I think, I think the importance of the sector, we have to remember that actually about more than 70% of the EU international trade is by sea. The trade within EU is about more than 30% is also by sea. It's maritime transport is a key driver to impacting the marine environment, and all of this means that it's very important to us as a maritime sector, and EMSA has the leading knowledge on that particular sector. So it was natural that our teams took contact, scope our work together, and design a process that led to this report. And the complementarity in knowledge, as Samy said, on the sectoral aspect, and at the EEA, of course, on the environmental aspect, was very natural, and also shows the EU added value of this collaboration.
For our live viewers, actually, the idea of these Ask an Expert sessions is that we ask your questions to our two guests, so Stéphane and Samy. So if you could actually post them in the Facebook comment section, we will be asking them later in that chat on the report or what the agencies work on in these two topics. Maybe just talking a little bit more about the report. Of course, we know that the sector impacts the environment. How can you just mention some of the main impacts?
Yeah,
Stéphane.
Maybe I can take this question. Well, there are a number of environmental impacts. I try to summarize them now, and then we might come to some of those later in the discussion today. But of course, there's some contribution to climate change, actually. First of all, because of burning of fossil fuels and emission of greenhouse gases. That's quite important. The sector represents about 13% of all the transport greenhouse gases emissions in Europe. Beyond these, there are other emissions to the atmosphere in the form of pollutants, nitrogen oxides, nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, and particulate matters, for example, are quite these emissions actually represent about 25% of all sectors in Europe for the first two, and about 10% for particulate matters. So the maritime sectors contributes quite a lot to the level of pollution in Europe on those matters. Then there's a number of pollution and emissions to water. In particular, the maritime sector introduces a number of non-indigenous species coming from other regions, which are moved with the ballast water of ships into European seas. This changes the food webs and changes the balance of the marine environment. This is an additional impact from the maritime sector. Mm-hmm. Let's also mention the issue of marine litter. There's a number of waste generated by maritime transport, and this also contributes to impacting the marine environment. Maybe I'll just stop here. There are some others, and we will come back to discuss the others as well.
Yeah, exactly, because I think, Samy, noise pollution, you said that you're working on noise. How does the sector impact? What do we mean by noise pollution when it comes to the maritime environment, marine environment?
Yeah, it's related to the underwater radiated noise, which is caused by the ship's engines and propellers, as well as the onboard machinery, that can cause quite a lot of impact on marine life. For example, loss of hearing or creating behavioral changes in animals. And in the report, we provide data that suggests that between 2014 and 2019, in fact, the total accumulated underwater radiated noise energy more than doubled in EU waters, so in these 5 years.
Is it because we have more ships, or is it because the engines and the why? Why did it double?
It's a mixture of elements which are related to the operations of the vessels and also clearly on the volume of traffic in our seas. So yeah, there is not a straightforward one-to-one relationship, but it's a number of contributing factors. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because I think one of the findings of the report was the link between global trade and the vital role of the sector and how it's been growing. So of course the environmental impacts are kind of linked to that as well. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this link between trade and the impacts?
That's the whole key, actually, because a lot of the trade and our economic growth depends on products being moved by sea and maritime transport. So this is why we together with EMSA, we've looked into the sustainability of this sector, because this trade is expected to increase in future. So we are going to be more probably even more dependent on maritime transport. Yet we have to deliver on a number of European policies protecting the marine environment and also other ecosystems. So this is why we really need to develop knowledge and provide data which allows stakeholders and countries and governments and all kinds of stakeholders around Europe to help transitioning to our sustainability, making sure that the sector is impacting less and less on the environment. And there are a number of options for that. And also because we're insisting a lot on the environmental impacts, there are also kind of good news. There are not so many, but there are some actually good news.
Like what?
Yeah, I think it's not a good news in itself, but it's a good trend. So I want to mention oil pollution in particular, because you were talking about the increase in trade, and actually there's been an increase in oil trade in Europe in the last decade for about, it has been an increase of 20%. And during that period of increasing trade in oil, there has been actually reduced numbers of oil spills around Europe. I think we have to acknowledge as well this positive trend. Of course, any oil spill is too much, but there has been a good trend here. And we have to acknowledge the efforts which have been made in terms of increasing decreasing the risks around ship structure, for example, and building materials. But there's been also a better monitoring and enforcement in Europe. And it's important to mention that there is satellite controlled areas across Europe, and the area covered by satellite observation has increased significantly the last 10 years, and also in recent years. This explains that we have achieved there is this positive trend actually when it comes to oil spill.
It's true that actually EMSA has got a very amazing control room where you do get a lot of information about any kind of vessel, right? Samy, please.
Yes, in real time. But if I may complement what Stéphane was talking about, what is interesting is also to see how the legislative framework has been changing in the last 30 to 50 years, because up until the 70s and post-70s, especially at international level and at the European level, the focus was very much on monitoring and reducing the impact on our seas. Right now, there is clearly an emphasis and more work being done in order also to prevent pollution to the atmosphere. And this can be really noticed also in the reduction of of sulfur dioxide oxides that Stéphane was mentioning, and the creation of areas which are called sulfur emission control areas, where vessels can only have on board fuel with a very tiny amount of sulfur in their fuel. And we can see in areas such as the Baltic Sea, for example, that the reduction of sulfur emissions has reached in some areas over 60%. So there are some really positive trends out there. It doesn't mean that, you know, it is all nice and rosy, but it's interesting to see where these positive trends are related to all of the legislation and the initiatives which are done at the European level.
Can we actually then say that this kind of legislative change that you mentioned is also one of the pioneers in the world when it comes to, for example, what you mentioned on sulfur dioxide control areas and stuff? So are we leading? Are we inspiring the rest of the world with this kind of approach?
This is definitely the case. We have two of the emission control areas in Europe. There's others around the world. And very importantly, there will be a discussion at the Barcelona Convention COP Conference of Parties, which will take place in Antalya in Turkey in December, to discuss on the future implementation of an additional control area for the whole of the Mediterranean Sea.
Very good. Just as a reminder for our viewers who might have joined recently, if you have questions for our experts, please post them in our Facebook feed, and I'll be asking your questions to Stéphane and Samy later. I'm just moving on. We did talk a little bit about this positive trend, which is encouraging, but maybe Samy, you could elaborate a little bit about what the main sustainability challenge is for the sector.
Yes, sure. So, like any other sector of the economy, the maritime transport sector is also addressing sustainability matters or is trying to do so in a holistic sense, let's say, as a whole. And whereas the main environmental concern of the sectors, as I was mentioning before, were traditionally in relation to water pollution, in the last years, the focus has changed to atmospheric pollution. And, you know, I think most people would agree that the most immediate sustainability challenge is related to the massive reliance of the sector on fossil fuels, and the need really to reduce the sector's the sector carbon footprint. And you know, there is a package of measures underway at EU and then international level, but there still needs to be really a substantial technological progress to allow, for instance, for an uptake of low and zero carbon fuels, as well as other energy solutions and renewable solutions. And this, interesting, is not only from the ship side, but we also need to see it from an infrastructure perspective.
Like ports, you mean?
So we have to think about the production of new fuels. It's about the distribution and the supply and the onboard modifications which are required in order to be able to use these new and alternative fuels. Because
if I can actually just, what you mentioned is a bit of retrofitting, right? There's so many vessels that already exist based on, you know, this kind of fossil fuel based, you know, and the ship's life is quite long, isn't it? Yeah, the ship's life, you know, on average are between 15, 20, if not 25 years. So we really have to look at a two-step approach. One which looks at what we can do now with the vessels that we have now, and looking forward to this 15, 20, 25 year progress time.
Maybe can I follow up on the idea of infrastructure? Thank you. I think you mentioned ports, actually. I mean, so Samy was talking about the whole chain of producing alternative fuels, etc. There are many consequences there, and measures have to be taken in order to support this transition to sustainability. Ports are key here in the sense that they have to have facilities to deliver these alternative fuels. And also they need to have facilities to, for example, deal with the waste generated by ships. So actually, when we think about maritime transport, there's a lot happening on land as well. And so that's the whole chain that has to be thought through, actually. And so I would like to make the link to circular economy. We talk a lot about circular economy in Europe. And again, the ship generates a lot of waste. This waste is taken back to shore. Actually, we estimate that only 70% of the waste generated is taken back to shore. And here we need to have facilities which deliver on the ambition of circular economy. So ports have a very important role to play there. And they have started actually to adapt quite a lot and to implement new facilities.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, Stéphane, the circular economy policies in Europe as well, but that fits within a wider policy setting. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this, the whole European Green Deal and
yes.
Zero Pollution Action Plan and stuff. How does the sector would fit in that, or the Marine Strategy Framework Directive and so on?
Yeah. Yes, I think the challenge is, as you described before, at the same time, we have a unique opportunity because the European Union, for the first time ever, actually has its first objective about the environment, on the environment. This is called the European Green Deal. And that's a massive initiative which includes different strategies which have been adopted over the last 2 years. And this is very groundbreaking because now it's not anymore about assessing whether our environment is in good or bad status. It's very much about giving the push so that we find solutions to these problems. And this is why it's very important. So it's the highest political agenda priority, but it's focusing on solutions. So we have a huge opportunity through that process to make progress. So one of the leading strategies under the European Green Deal include the biodiversity strategy, which, as its name says, focuses on biodiversity on land, but also at sea. There are protection of the marine environment objectives. There is restoration objectives as well. The Zero Pollution Action Plan is another one that you mentioned. It focuses specifically to protect and to reduce the pollution, again, also on land and at sea. It links to nutrients and pollution with hazardous substances. It links to biological pollution like invasive alien species. It links also to marine litter, which has been very much in the media over the last 5-6 years. So these are key initiatives that we are supporting through our work. The implementation of these initiatives need knowledge, need data analysis. And this is what we are doing here in order to support the implementation of these initiatives and help all stakeholders. So at the European level, but also at regional level, national level, local level, but also NGOs and business organizations. So that's really the context of our work.
If I can make...
Yes, please.
Sorry, Gulcin, to interrupt. If I can make, once again, complement what Stéphane said, I think there's also some proposals that are really focusing on the maritime transport sector as well. And if I may, very briefly, I would just like to highlight two. And the first one is an initiative for establishing a common EU regulatory framework to, in fact, increase the share of renewable and low carbon fuels. So that what we were talking about just before. And this is called the Fuel EU Maritime Initiative. And the second one, which is, quite important, and there's a lot of talk about it, is related to the extension of the emission trading system, so the famous ETS, to include the maritime transport sector. So there's there's quite a lot of initiatives on the table, and as Stéphane said, both agencies are really there to support the member states and the Commission in this.
We have one question which is partly linked to some of these initiatives from Eleftheria, who is asking, what is the evolution of greenhouse gas emissions from shipping? Have they been increasing or decreasing or flat? I mean, can you just give a basic idea of?
Shall I go, Stéphane?
Yes, please.
I'll be very brief. So we have data from 2018 and 2019, which show that the emissions from the maritime transport sector made up approximately 13.5% of the EU's total transport greenhouse gas emissions. And so to put this in perspective, road transport emission accounts to 71%, and aviation a little bit more than 14%. And of these emissions, just one last interesting fact is that a third of these maritime transport greenhouse gas emissions actually come from container ships. How do we know this? We know this because there's a piece of legislation which is called the MRV regulation, monitoring, reporting and validation, through which every ship has to report on its emissions.
Mm-hmm. I'll come back to the report and the joint effort because I think when you talked about the report, you mentioned that this was a first assessment of its kind, which begs the question, what next? Will there be a second one? Are we going to be able to monitor this kind of trend and evolution in these various aspects that this first report has highlighted?
Yeah.
So maybe, Stéphane, you could start.
Yeah, I think we want to build upon the very good experience we have had collaborating with EMSA. As Samy said, it was a very enjoyable collaboration. The complementarity of our teams was really good and very high. And we have also had very good and positive feedbacks on this report and the data which is included. It was needed, and the stakeholders also feedback, very positive comments on this. So we want to have another one soon, maybe in the next 2 or 3 years. It depends on the format, actually, because we're not thinking about publishing a report per se. We are thinking maybe developing some dashboards which would be made online and would provide updated data to stakeholders who would be able to download data or do some graphs or download charts. So that's one idea to move into an online version and update the data that we have included in the report this time around. The other item is that we are thinking about including more topics. So we are looking, for example, at the idea of including fisheries. It's also about transport. So the same environmental impacts are also included there, are also linked to fisheries, climate change, air pollution, waste, marine litter. And in addition, of course, it's linked to the use of natural resources. So it's very important, fisheries being the main impact on marine environment. And then the other topic we are thinking maybe including is our ports, as we discussed before. It's very important, I think, to look at the infrastructure also on land. So these are just scoping ideas for the moment, and we will, I guess we will be communicating with the stakeholders in the next year about our intention. But if people here following and willing to provide us feedback on the report that we published, we are also still taking comments and feedbacks on what we've just finished.
There's actually one question that has just been posted about whether you've been in contact with the maritime sector, transport sector on the findings of this report. So yes, two agencies got together, but have you fed this knowledge to the sector? So.
Yes. Yeah, I think Samy can complement afterwards, but just to mention that we, in the launch conference in September, we have invited all stakeholders, so not only public, but also the practitioners and the business sector was there. Also to mention that in October last year, we had actually a workshop during which we presented the draft results of the report. And we had an extensive consultation of all our stakeholders, private and public stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So we've received a lot of comments through that process and taken this into account.
Yeah. Before maybe we start wrapping up, because actually, Samy, you are very much in contact with the maritime. The EMSA is transport sector practitioners and stakeholders. Have you heard any feedback, uptake about the findings? What is your sense about their efforts towards sustainability? Are they aware of the policy context that they have to strive towards? And can you see any changes in the remarks?
Yeah, I think one of the added values of the report and the process of publishing the report has in fact been the very close consultation with the stakeholders. And there's a number of different stakeholders here, and we're looking at the maritime and the environmental administrations within member states. There's industry, there's the research and development community, and there is, very importantly, the civil society. And I think really one added value was to be able to bring in all of these actors together and sit down and work towards a common goal. Now, I think especially this aspect was a new element of bringing everybody together that was very positively received. And we have seen it in both the stakeholder consultation workshop that we had, both during the written consultation, because we left the window, the door open for people to engage and interact with us for a couple of months, and we really had quite a lot of interaction ongoing. And to this extent, we still have quite a lot of actors, coming to both agencies and asking additional information, or asking, in the future, will we be able to work with you? Can we provide additional data sets? So I think,
going back to my original question, yes, this line of work will follow up, and there is interest from stakeholders. We have a few minutes left, and we have actually a question from that is about mitigation measures from Brian Felipe. So we talked a little bit about solutions, but I think it would be nice to reflect on his question as well. So what are the predicted mitigation measures? And was the root of the environmental problem considered, or only the environmental impacts and how to deal with them? So you mentioned a little bit the circular economy, what happens on land. Maybe you could reflect on some mitigation measures.
Yeah.
Who would like to start? Stéphane?
I think Samy is better placed to talk about the energy alternative fuels, but I can say something about the other mitigation measures. I think we said that the monitoring of oil spills has improved a lot, and there are quite a bit of push of being better in the response being put in place when there are oil spills being happening across Europe. And actually EMSA is at the forefront of this. On the non-indigenous species and invasive alien species, there's a requirement to have management plans for ballast waters. So there are initiatives being taken and implemented in order to improve the way actually the ballast waters are managed and decrease the number of non-indigenous species being introduced in Europe. These are two quite specific response measures. I wanted to also mention and make the link to maritime spatial planning, because we were saying before that operating maritime transport links to a whole set of it's very broad as a domain. There are a lot of stakeholders. Maritime spatial planning are plans that countries need to develop in order to allocate and make sure that there's a common understanding of how the maritime space is used between the different sectors, between maritime transport, but fisheries, exploitation of extraction of oil or other energy from seabed bottom, which still happens. There's tourism, there's coastal tourism, etc. So this is very important as an added, it was mentioned as added value of the report. These different stakeholders have to come together in order to have a common understanding of how to use the space at sea.
Okay.
And that's more governance, but this is very important.
It's one of the challenges. Maybe a few remarks on the energy side.
Yeah, I think what is interesting in the report, we have a whole chapter, in fact, on the sustainable solutions. And I would say that 75% of that chapter covers, in fact, the technical readiness of alternative fuels. So I would suggest our listener to download the report because that section, that chapter really focuses on the technical solutions. You know, how do you produce the new fuels? How you use the new fuels? And what this means for the whole sector is provided in that chapter.
Can I just, because we need to wrap up in a few minutes. So when we talk about solutions, maybe then our viewers will also ask, is there anything that we can do as citizens? And, you know, does knowledge help? Where can I find that kind of information? Is there anything that I can influence in helping, because it is linked to trade and because, you know, if I live in a coastal zone, etc. Is there anything that a citizen, individuals can do?
Yeah.
Very quickly, yeah?
Yeah, okay. So I think, yeah, there are different things that citizens can do. First of all, maybe being informed about the issues. So actually on EMSA and EEA websites, we have a lot of materials about the environment in general, and then specifically on maritime transport. So that's the first item. And then we have also at the agency, I want to mention that we have something, citizen science application on mobile phones called Marine Litter Watch. This is actually empowering citizens across Europe to report data about marine litter. So that's, again, we rely more and more in Europe across the different themes actually on citizen science. And that's the one that we have developed by the agency, which is collecting a lot of information, vital information about marine litter. And we also publish the results every year. And then in our daily, I would say also in our daily behavior and consumption patterns, we have to pay attention to what we are doing on a daily basis. We know that plastic is a key problem in Europe. So using less plastic, being more responsible, more sustainable in our patterns is also very important, of course.
Yeah, I can only agree with Stéphane. You know, I think as citizens, we have to, you know, keep informed, and we have the room and space to take action. There are many sources of information gathering, which I really warmly invite all interested listeners to have a look at. I'm sure, Gulcin, you will be able to send the links to these both EMSA and EEA portals. I mean, and also when it comes to what citizens can do, I think we are the greatest resource for protecting our environment and for enforcing the different environmental laws. So yeah, I can really confirm what Stéphane said. I can also add that just within the context of EMTER, we, both me and Stéphane, are available to engage and discuss with anybody who's interested in this context. There is a generic email address which is emter@emsa.europa.eu, which we regularly check, and so we are not separating the citizens from the rest of the discussion.
So you're open to ideas as well, which is nice. I can reassure you that many of the links of the things that you mentioned are already shared with our viewers on Facebook. So in 20 seconds, if you have anything to add, maybe last remarks, if you forgot to mention anything, this is the moment. I'll give the floor to you both, to Stéphane and Samy, for one last time, and then we'll wrap up. If there's anything that you think, just the 20 seconds, not more.
I think there's a lot of very good will, actually, both on the private and public institutions to take this forward. As it was one of the questions. I think we are all aware in the public and private sectors that there is a challenge, and there's a very good will to improve the situation.
That's reassuring. Samy.
Yes, I think the momentum is there for us to keep on working on the relationship between the maritime transport sector and the environment. We have done a first step, and there's room and willingness to progress along these lines.
Thank you very much, Stéphane. Thank you, Samy, for joining for this live chat. Thank you to all our viewers. Thank you for your questions. We'll be back with our Ask an Expert series again. So watch the space, mainly our Facebook page. And thank you again.
Thank you, and take care, everybody.
Bye now. Bye-bye.